Little House on the Prairie, a story about family love and the beauty of simple values. But behind those peaceful fields were lives far from serene. The most perfect man on screen would later break his own family apart in real life. The most hated villain in America carried a pain no one ever saw. But it all truly begins with the man you thought you understood the most, Michael Landon as Charles Pay Ingalls. Before the world ever saw him as the most trusted father on television, Michael Landon was already living a life shaped by quiet, invisible fractures. As Charles Pa Ingalls, he embodied warmth, strength, and unwavering love, a man who could hold a family together through anything, offering audiences a sense of safety that felt almost real. But behind that calm presence was a child who had once pulled his own mother from the water after her suicide attempt, a boy humiliated by his struggles and marked by isolation. Born Eugene Maurice Orowitz on October 31, 1936, in New York City, he carried those early wounds into a career that would demand both control and perfection. On Little House on the Prairie, Landon wasn't just the lead, he was its architect, writing, directing, and shaping the emotional core of the series. Yet while he built a vision of family stability on screen, his personal life began to fracture. What happens when the man who teaches millions about loyalty begins to lose his own? During the height of the show's success, his affair with makeup artist Cindy Clarico led to a highly publicized divorce, shattering the image he had carefully created. He would marry Clarico in 1983, beginning a new chapter, even as his reputation quietly shifted. After the series ended, Landon continued his creative control with Highway to Heaven, earning a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1984. But the final act came swiftly. In April 1991, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Just 3 months later, on July 1, 1991, at the age of 54, he was gone. In the end, the man who gave America its strongest father figure left behind a legacy both beautiful and broken, and a question that still lingers: was the role ever meant to save him, or simply to hide him? Melissa Gilbert, as Laura Ingalls Wilder. Before she became the heartbeat of a generation, Melissa Gilbert was already living a story marked by quiet loss that few ever saw. As Laura Ingalls Wilder, she was fierce, curious, and unbreakably resilient, a girl who turned hardship into strength, growing before audiences from a spirited child into a woman shaped by love and endurance. Born on May 8, 1964, in Los Angeles, California, Gilbert entered the world only to be placed for adoption, later raised by actor Paul Gilbert and Barbara Crane. But stability was fragile. Her adoptive parents divorced when she was 6, and at 11 she was told her father had died of a stroke, only to learn years later it had been suicide. Selected from over 500 candidates, she became the center of Little House on the Prairie, carrying its emotional core for 9 seasons. Yet behind the scenes, the pressure of growing up on camera quietly followed her into adulthood. What happens when the symbol of hope begins to lose her own sense of balance? After the show, Gilbert built a steady career in television, films, and voice acting, while also stepping into leadership as president of the Screen Actors Guild from 2001 to 2005. But her personal life unraveled in cycles. 2 divorces, public financial struggles, including a $360,000 tax debt in 2015, and a difficult battle with alcohol and prescription drug dependency in her late 30s. She married actor Timothy Busfield in 2013, seeking stability, yet new controversies would emerge in 2026, pushing her further into privacy. Now, in her early 60s, living between New York and the Catskill Mountains, she writes, reflects, and slowly reclaims her narrative. And perhaps, in the quiet that followed the storm, the little girl who once ran across open fields is still learning how to stand still. Karen Grassle as Caroline Ma Ingalls. Before she became America's most comforting mother figure, Karen Grassle was quietly fighting battles no one on screen could ever see. As Caroline Ma Ingalls, she radiated warmth, patience, and quiet resilience. the steady force who held her family together while the world around them shifted. Born on February 25, 1942 in Berkeley, California, Grassle spent her early years moving to Ventura, where she discovered theater as both an escape and a calling. Trained in classical acting, she built her craft on stage long before television found her carrying with her a discipline that would later define one of the most beloved mothers in television history. On Little House on the Prairie, she became the emotional anchor balancing strength with tenderness, offering viewers a sense of peace that felt deeply personal. But behind the scenes, tensions simmered. Her relationship with co-star Michael Landon grew strained over time, shaped by creative control and unequal pay, an unspoken reality that would only be fully understood years later. And off-camera, a quieter struggle was unfolding. What happens when the woman who represents stability begins to lose her own? After the series ended, Grassle returned to her first love stage acting, performing across California while raising her son, Zach Radford. Yet her personal life was marked by a long battle with alcohol dependency, a struggle she would later reveal with honesty in her 2021 memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust. Her career continued in smaller film roles, including Wyatt Earp and Not to Forget, but it was her resilience that defined her second act. Now in her mid-80s, living in the San Francisco Bay Area, she leads a quieter life, advocating for women and Alzheimer's awareness. And in the silence beyond the spotlight, the woman who once held a fictional family together finally learned how to hold herself with the same grace. Alison Arngrim as Nellie Oleson. Before audiences cheered every time Nellie Oleson was humiliated on screen, Alison Arngrim had already survived a childhood far darker than anything the script could offer. As Nellie, she became television's original mean girl, spoiled, cruel, and unforgettable, yet somehow magnetic, turning every insult into comedy and every conflict into a moment viewers couldn't look away from. Born on January 18, 1962 in New York City, Arngrim grew up inside the entertainment industry, surrounded by cameras and expectations. But behind that world was a silence she carried for years. Between the ages of 6 and 9, she endured abuse at the hands of her own brother, a trauma she would not publicly reveal until decades later. Cast at just 12 years old in 1974, she transformed Nellie into an icon so convincing that fans blurred fiction with reality. People shouted at her in public, some even throwing objects, unable to separate the actress from the character. What does it do to a child when the world sees her as someone to hate? After the series, Arngrim refused to disappear. Instead, she reclaimed her voice. She married musician Robert Paul Schoonover in 1993 after meeting through AIDS activism, building a partnership rooted in shared purpose. Her memoir, Confessions of a Prairie Bitch, released in 2010, became a bestseller, exposing both the humor behind the scenes and the pain she had long hidden. She turned her past into performance, touring a one-woman show across the country well into 2025 and 2026, while advocating fiercely for child protection laws. Now in her 60s, living a quieter but purposeful life in California, she stands not as the villain people once feared, but as proof that even the most misunderstood characters can rewrite their own ending. Melissa Sue Anderson as Mary Ingalls. Long before she stepped away from the spotlight, Melissa Sue Anderson had already lived through a loss that would quietly define her later years. As Mary Ingalls, she was Grace under pressure. Gentle, intelligent, and deeply empathetic, the sister whose journey into blindness became one of the most heartbreaking and powerful arcs in Little House on the Prairie. Born on September 26, 1962 in Berkeley, California, Anderson moved to Los Angeles at a young age, where her parents' eventual divorce during her early teens added a layer of instability beneath her rising success. At just 11, she entered the series and quickly became its emotional core, earning an Emmy nomination for her portrayal of Mary's transformation. Behind the scenes, she approached the role with a seriousness beyond her years, studying real-life experiences of visual impairment to bring authenticity to the screen. But as fame grew, so did the quiet question, What does it cost to feel everything so deeply, for millions to watch? After leaving the show earlier than many of her co-stars, Anderson chose a different path. While she appeared in films like Happy Birthday to Me and later projects such as 10.5 Apocalypse, she gradually stepped away from Hollywood's demands. In 1990, she married television producer Michael Sloan, beginning a partnership that would span more than 3 decades and shape a life centered on family rather than fame. Together, they raised 2 children, building a quiet stability far from the industry that had once defined her. By 2007, she became a Canadian citizen, settling in Montreal and embracing a more private existence. But in August 2025, Sloan passed away at the age of 78, leaving behind a silence that echoed through her carefully built world. Now in her early 60s, Anderson lives a life of reflection and resilience. And perhaps in choosing to step away, she proved that sometimes the strongest role is knowing when to leave the stage. Victor French as Isaiah Edwards. Long before his life was cut brutally short, Victor French had already lived with a quiet recklessness that would one day catch up to him. As Isaiah Edwards, he brought rough charm, humor, and fierce loyalty to Little House on the Prairie, becoming the kind of friend every man wished he had. Born on December 4, 1934 in Santa Barbara, California, French grew up in the shadow of Hollywood, the son of a stuntman, learning early how to survive both on set and in life. On screen, his chemistry with Michael Landon felt effortless, grounding the series with warmth and authenticity. Off-screen, that bond extended into his career as the two reunited in Highway to Heaven, where French also stepped behind the camera to direct. His life seemed steady: 2 marriages, 3 children, and a career that continued to evolve. But what happens when the habits you carry quietly begin to define your ending? Years of heavy smoking and drinking lingered beneath the surface until in March 1989, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Just 3 months later, on June 15, 1989, Victor French was gone at 54. Decades later, in April 2026, his son Victor Jr. would also pass from cancer, echoing a loss that never fully faded. And in the end, the man who played the strongest friend left behind a legacy of loyalty and a silence that still feels unfinished. Before we move on, if you grew up with this movie, please leave a comment which character resonated with you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to Legends of Classics, because the stories behind the scenes sometimes surprise you even more than the movie itself. Katherine McGregor as Harriet Olsen. Before she disappeared from the world that made her famous, Katherine McGregor had already begun walking away long before anyone noticed. As Harriet Olsen, she was sharp-tongued, dramatic, and irresistibly over the top, the kind of character audiences loved to laugh at, even when she caused chaos in every scene. Born Dorley Dean McGregor on January 12, 1925 in Glendale, California. She grew up far from the spotlight, raised in Colorado by her mother and stepfather, finding her voice through theater before ever stepping onto a television set. On Little House on the Prairie, she became one half of the unforgettable Olsen family, delivering performances that balanced comedy with a biting edge. But off-screen, her life moved in a quieter, more complicated direction. What happens when someone known for making noise begins to crave silence instead? After the series ended, McGregor didn't chase fame. Instead, she retreated from Hollywood almost entirely, dedicating herself to teaching children's theater and exploring spiritual life through Hinduism. Her 2 brief marriages ended long before her later years, and she lived without children, building a life defined not by relationships, but by personal transformation. She openly battled alcoholism, eventually finding recovery through her spiritual path. In her final decades, she lived peacefully, far from cameras, until her passing on November 13, 2018, at the age of 93. And in the end, the woman who once filled every room with her voice chose a different legacy, one of quiet, deliberate stillness. Dean Butler as Almanzo Wilder. Before he became the face of one of television's most beloved love stories, Dean Butler was quietly stepping into a role that would define him for decades. As Almanzo Wilder, he was gentle, steady, and deeply romantic. The man who completed Laura's journey from childhood to adulthood, embodying a kind of love that felt both simple and enduring. Born on May 20th, 1956 in Prince George, British Columbia, Canada, Butler pursued communication arts at the University of the Pacific, never fully knowing how quickly his life would shift once he stepped in front of the camera. On Little House on the Prairie, his presence brought emotional balance, offering viewers a vision of mature love that felt rare and sincere. Yet behind the charm was a young actor navigating sudden recognition. What happens when the role people adore becomes the one they never let you leave? After the series, Butler continued acting in projects like The New Gidget and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but his path gradually shifted behind the scenes. In 2001, he married actress Katherine McGregor, building a stable partnership far from Hollywood's volatility. Rather than chase constant visibility, he focused on producing, most notably, the Emmy-nominated sports series Prairie, which ran for 10 seasons. His 2024 memoir, Prairie Man, revealed a reflective, grounded perspective on fame and identity. Now approaching 70, living in California, Butler remains connected to the legacy that shaped him. And in the end, the man who once represented a perfect love story chose something quieter, writing his own far from the spotlight. Matthew Labyorteaux as Albert Ingalls. Before he became the fragile heart of Walnut Grove, Matthew Labyorteaux had already fought battles most children would never remember surviving. As Albert Ingalls, he was mischievous, yet deeply kind. A boy searching for belonging whose emotional struggles brought some of the most heartbreaking moments to Little House on the Prairie. Born on December 8, 1966, in Los Angeles, California. His life began with uncertainty. Adopted as an infant, he faced severe health challenges early on, including a congenital heart condition, difficulty walking until age 3, and the inability to speak until he was 5. On screen, his vulnerability felt real, because it was. Behind the scenes, his journey mirrored the resilience he portrayed, turning personal hardship into emotional truth. But what happens when a child who once struggled to communicate becomes the voice of so many unseen stories? After the series, Labyorteaux continued acting, starring in Whiz Kids before gradually transitioning into voice work. His voice would later appear in projects like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and major video games, including Fallout and Mulan, carving out a steady, quieter career away from the spotlight. In 2020, he married Leslie, embracing family life and becoming a stepfather to her 2 children. Now, in his late 50s, he lives largely out of public view, focusing on voice acting and personal life. And in the end, the boy who once struggled to find his voice didn't just survive, he learned to use it in ways few ever expected. Richard Bull as Nels Olson. Long before his life faded into a quiet ending, Richard Bull had spent decades mastering the art of being overlooked. As Nels Olson, he was soft-spoken, patient, and endlessly tolerant, the calm center in a household defined by chaos, a man whose quiet kindness made him unforgettable. Born on June 26, 1924 in Zion, Illinois, Bull found his path to acting almost by accident, studying at the Goodman Theater and building a steady career through persistence rather than fame. On Little House on the Prairie, his performance balanced humor with sincerity, creating a character audiences sympathized with even in the most absurd situations. Behind the scenes, he carried that same quiet consistency into real life. But what happens when a man spends his life supporting others, never demanding the spotlight for himself? After the series, Bull continued working steadily, appearing in over 100 roles across television, including Hill Street Blues and ER. Yet his most enduring role may have been far from the camera. In 1948, he married Barbara Collentine, beginning a partnership that would last 66 years, a rarity in an industry defined by impermanence. There were no major scandals, no dramatic collapses, only a life built on patience and loyalty. In his later years, he lived peacefully until his passing on February 3, 2014, at the age of 89 due to pneumonia. And perhaps that was his greatest legacy, not the noise he made, but the quiet strength he never needed to prove. Lindsay and Sydney Greenbush as Carrie Ingalls. Before their lives quietly split into two separate paths, Lindsay and Sydney Greenbush had already shared one identity that millions believed was a single child. As Carrie Ingalls, they were the softest presence in Little House on the Prairie, innocent, gentle, and symbolic of the family's warmth, appearing as one character while living as two behind the scenes. Born on May 25, 1970, in Hollywood, California, the twins entered acting early, appearing in Sunshine before joining the series at just 4 years old. Few viewers realized the illusion. The role of Carrie was played interchangeably, their childhoods blending into one performance. But what happens when the world only remembers half of who you were? After the series ended, both stepped away from acting, choosing ordinary lives far from Hollywood. Lindsay built a family raising her daughter and later marrying Daniel Sanchez in 2014, while Sydney pursued a life with horses and rodeo. Yet tragedy found its way back. In 2009, Sydney's husband, William Rocky Foster, died by suicide, leaving a silence that echoed beyond the screen. Now, in their mid-50s, they live quietly, occasionally returning for reunions. And in the end, the sisters who once shared a single role learned to carry separate lives, each holding a different piece of the same memory. Kevin Hagen, as Dr. Hiram Baker. Before illness would quietly take his voice, Kevin Hagen had spent a lifetime playing the man others depended on. As Dr. Hiram Baker, he was steady, kind, and reassuring. The doctor every town wished for, bringing calm to chaos and hope to the sick. Born on April 3, 1928 in Chicago, Illinois, Hagen grew up without his father, raised by a circle of strong women, and nearly chose medicine before turning to acting at 27. On screen, he became a symbol of trust, but off-screen, his life unfolded with its own complexities. What happens when the man who heals others must face something he cannot fix? After the series, Hagen continued performing, even creating a one-man show in 1991 that celebrated the wisdom of Little House. His personal life, marked by 4 marriages, eventually found stability with his wife Jan in 1993. In 2004, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. A year later, on July 9, 2005, he passed away at 77. And in the end, the doctor who gave others comfort left behind a quiet reminder: some battles even the strongest cannot heal. They were once a family the world believed in, but time told a different story. Some are gone, taken too soon by illness, by silence, by battles they never showed on screen. Others survived, carrying scars hidden behind the very smiles that made us feel safe. Childhoods, fractured marriages, broken addictions fought in the dark, and yet they kept playing the roles we loved, because maybe that's the truth. Little House on the Prairie was never just about comfort. It was about people trying to hold life together, while quietly falling apart. And here's the haunting part. The place that taught us about home was built on lives that never truly found one. So tell me, whose story stayed with you the longest, and who do you think paid the highest price for that perfect image? Because if Walnut Grove felt like forever, why did so many of them never get the ending we thought they deserved?